We're going to talk about mobilizing or multiplying extraordinary prayer. I'm going to say a few things. I'd love for you to interrupt me with questions, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions as we go along. So a lot of times we talk about it's not what you can do, it's what's it going to take. And I want to put a little caveat in here. You can't mobilize prayer if you're not praying yourself. So the first place to mobilize prayer is from yourself. I like a team in Turkey that they said, we tried to figure out how do you get to extraordinary prayer? And we said, okay, it's just extraordinary. And so they said, what are we ordinarily doing? And they looked at it both qualitatively and quantitatively. They said, how do we do extra? And so they said, all right, we're praying as a team 30 minutes a week. Let's start praying as a team an hour a week. And then after that becomes ordinary, all right, let's bump that up. Let's do it an hour and a half. Qualitatively, they looked at, we're really praying for ourselves mainly. So how do we qualitatively make it extra? And they begin to create some ways to focus on praying outside themselves. Some of you guys know Steve and Laura Smith. Steve wrote the T for T book and helped start 2414 and went to be with the Lord about a year and a half ago, I guess, or maybe almost 2 years ago. And he describes the time they were in China, working to catalyze a movement. And they realized at the end of a year, they were kind of doing an evaluation that they had gone backwards in a lot of ways. And they began to try to figure out, well, why is that? What have we done? Why are we going backwards? And he said their conclusion was they quit praying for God's vision and they'd started praying for the logistics and for the personal needs and for the visas and for the travel, all that stuff. And he said, you can kind of cloak selfish prayers in a spiritual costume, but they're still selfish prayers. And so when we're praying, one of the things we ask people is, what's your motivation for this? Why are you motivated to be a part of movements? And, we're all human. We've all got our sinful nature. We've all got our weaknesses. We all fail a million times. But we can still examine, well, what are we really doing this for? And in the Heart and Four Fields diagram that's more complete, at the top, we always have this thing about God's glory. These are always for God's glory. Anything we do, anything we are, and when selfishly we don't want it to be for God's glory, we got to keep saying, all right, Lord, forgive me. I'm giving that back to you. Maybe ask forgiveness for anyone else that we've come across like that with. And I did that with some folks like, well, that's assumed. I'm like, you know what? The minute you start assuming it is when you're really in trouble. So I know one team that actually has one person on the team, and they rotated this, who looks at all their communication, who looks at all their prayer requests, who looks at all their other information, and asks the question, is this about us or is this about God? And that's just a check on themselves. So, are you involved because you want to be seen as successful? Are you involved because you want to feel successful? Are you involved because you want to be able to brag about things? Those are all temptations that we all face. And I think the first thing in prayer is just coming back to God, this is about you. Show us how we need to pray, what we need to pray for. A lot of times people think of prayer as mainly talking to God. Prayer is communicating with God. So people say, well, listening prayer. I'm like, that should be redundant. Prayer should not just be talking prayer and then, okay, let's call it listening prayer because we don't ever listen. So listening to God, if you're not familiar with listening prayer, I think some folks on this call are. They could help you kind of work on that aspect of it. So Lord, what do you want us to pray for? What is on your mind? Jesus said Jesus sent them every place that he was about to go. Where are you about to go? Where are you about to break loose? We want to go where you're going. So I'd say start with yourself. God, cleanse me of any motivations that are not from you. I confess to others and to you and to others anything that's not of you. When that creeps back in, I want to prove other people wrong, or I want to prove I'm right, or I want to prove I'm effective, or I want the satisfaction of, Lord, forgive me for that. I want this to be about you and the people who desperately need you. And so when you look at extraordinary prayer, look at both quality and quantity. Most movement leaders pray, I've heard this number inflated a lot, but most of them will tell you about 2 hours a day. And that includes maybe praying husband and wife together. That includes listening to God. That includes, a lot of them will pray throughout the day, but that's a pretty common, Steve Parlato calls it a industry standard. It's pretty common, shows up a lot. There are variations on it. So how do you increase your own prayer and praying with others? And then how do you keep asking God to keep you praying in the right vein? How many of you have read Kingdom Unleashed? All right, so somewhere in there, I've forgotten page 135 or something like that, there's a description of a movement's prayer rhythms. And it's actually in West Africa. It doesn't say so in the book. But, every year this is true, a lot of movements, January of every year, they spend that month praying and fasting. We talk about prayer. A lot of times as Americans, we don't talk about fasting. That's a very, very common thing biblically. It's a very common thing globally. It's a very common thing in movements. So 30 days prayer and fasting. Some will do a Daniel fast. The guys in Iran say, we have to do a Daniel fast. It's in the Bible from Iran, so we have to do it that way. Others will do just a liquid fast for 30 days. Others will do, eat one meal a day. So the way you do it is not important. In fact, sometimes, change it up. One year do it this way, and another year do it another way. Some of my friends say, when you're stuck, go to prayer and fasting, right? Don't just schedule it. It's January or this movement. I encourage you to go back and read. January, they do the month of prayer and fasting. And then the first 3 days of each month, they do a prayer and fasting. And then like at midnight on the last day of the month, they go out in the street and pray together. I mean, it's got a great sequence of lots of different rhythms of prayer. And I think that helps to have a variety of ways to pray, varieties of rhythm. But it's not just a schedule. It's a, God, we need you desperately in this situation. Please intervene and let us hear what you have in mind. Let us get in concert with what you're doing, Holy Spirit. So rhythms of prayer can be of great help.